It's another edition of the Stretch Big podcast. I lied to you guys. I said we weren't ready for 2 podcasts in a week yet, but here we are. This is the second pod of the week, and I teased it on the last one. It's the big season preview pod. And we looking at the roster, looking at the conference. Didn't quite get into schedule like game by game stuff because there's only so much time in the day. But thankfully, I was lucky enough to be joined by Nebraska basketball beat writer for the Omaha World-Herald, Wilson Moore. Wilson's going into his second season covering the program. He was on the pod back in the spring, and he's the first recurring guest in the show's history so far, the really illustrious history of this podcast. So got, looked at the roster from top to bottom, talked a little Big Ten, ceiling, floor, potential, what needs to happen, what's going to, determine, how far this year's iteration of Nebraska basketball can go. Talked with Wilson for an hour, just talking basketball. I promise the podcasts will not be this long, but this is the season preview extravaganza of sorts because it's almost here. Monday night, Nebraska opens the season with ET Rio Grande Valley, and college basketball will be back. So we'll get to my podcast chat with Wilson, but first, sponsorship. This season, the Stretch Big podcast is proudly presented by Bird Darts, and homegrown original Nebraska golf company, and the original premium pack of golf tees. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got one of them in my hand. Bird Darts was founded and started as the brainchild of one of the smartest people I know, one of my former coworkers on the basketball staff at Nebraska, Brett Sapp. And these are flying online. Bird Darts, they got the premium tees. You can get them in packs, or you can get them even in cartons. They've got the apparel. I've got the hat on right now. And it's really sleek, really well designed stuff. That's the first thing you notice is the packaging, really, really sleek and unique. And they even do custom packs. If you've got a company golf outing coming up, a scramble fundraiser you want to hand out some custom packs for, or even just a family outing you want to have as a keepsake for everyone on the course that day, it'll help amplify your event, amplify your brand, promo, retail. The possibilities are endless. Each of these packs, they have 18 bamboo tees, and they're where you need your tees to be on the course, in your pocket, in your hand, in the pack, not spread throughout your bag, not making a mess. You're not digging through random pockets in your golf bag looking for tees. They're right there with you. And if you're playing with strangers, they're sure to break the ice. A little icebreaker. You pull this out of your pocket, someone's going to ask where you got it. That's for sure. With any group, whether it's your family members, friends, or just strangers, because there was an extra spot and you decided to be the fourth with some randoms for a round of golf. Fall golf is one of my favorite guilty pleasures. I know it's getting cold outside, but I enjoy the fall golf. So get yourself some tees for the fall, or stock up for the spring. It's time to expect more from your golf tees. Join the flock today. birddarts.com. Swing away. We love milestones on this podcast, and this milestone today marks the first recurring guest on the show, and it is an honor to be joined once again by my good friend Wilson Moore from the Omaha World-Herald. Very talented writer, very good at his job. He's an even better slow-pitch softball third baseman. We learned that over the summer and fall. Wilson, thanks for doing this, man. Good to see you. Good to talk with you.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. I didn't realize. Yes, I didn't realize I was the first repeat guest. I gotta add that to my resume.
Absolutely, man. No, we're happy to have you. And the season is closer. It's our time of year coming up here in just a few short days. With the start of basketball season, I figured there'd be nobody better to have on for the big season preview podcast. Your first year on the Nebraska basketball beat was a little out of the ordinary, considering there was a lot of winning. There was a trip to the NCAA tournament. We talked about this in the spring the last time you were on. It was not your typical year around these parts. You look at this roster on paper compared to last year. What do you see when you're looking at it, comparing this year's group to last year's group? Obviously, it starts at the top with Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary being the commonalities, but there's a lot of new faces too. What do you think when you look at comparing the two groups?
Yeah, I see the reality of how Fred Hoiberg has designed and built this team, not just this season, but over the past 2 or 3. It's very veteran heavy. That was a priority for Nebraska. We know that. Fred has said that a couple times, that they wanted to stay old. They saw that as one of the reasons for their success a year ago, was the veteran presences, guys like Bryce Williams, Rink Mast, Josiah Alex, so that was a priority. And also just the fact that the roster looks the way it does just speaks to how the reality of building through the transfer portal, that you're going to have a lot of newcomers every year if your priority, like it is for Nebraska, is having an experienced team that's been around for a while. So we're seeing that come from kind of every angle. We got guys like Raleigh Wooster, Braxton Mia, Andrew Morgan, guys all in their fourth or fifth years of college who have played a lot of basketball, aren't going to need to be, brought up to speed on what they need to do, understand what they need to do. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. There's what Nebraska lacks in continuity from a season ago. It makes up for, at least in theory, in kind of veteran presence and just assuredness that this is a team that won't melt down mentally in a big situation.
Yeah, and last year's group, I kind of, affectionately labeled them as a mid-major all-star team, just where the guys came from and their backgrounds. Obviously, Bryce Williams coming from Charlotte, Rick Mass coming from Bradley, Josiah Alec, UMKC, New Mexico, Keisei Tominaga, goes down as a folk hero, but he's still an undersized two guard who started off playing JUCO ball in West Texas. And this year's group, there's one common thing. They bring in 6 transfers. 5 of those 6 are coming from power conference programs. They played, extensive minutes, when they were healthy. And they have been starters, multiple, at least, more often than not, they've been starters. These aren't just bench pieces that are coming in, and just saying, hey, you're on a Big Ten team now. And they even got 2 guys who were on other Big Ten rosters last year. But we're kind of gonna do just looking at the roster, top to bottom, what do we think? What are some, who are some guys that stand out? Some guys who maybe aren't getting talked about enough. You've been around, You've been around the program in the off season more than I have, but I still hear things. I've got these big ass ears on the side of my head. I'll hear some talk, from time to time. And I think, it definitely, I talked about, when I asked you that first question, I think it definitely starts with Bryce Williams. He is the leading scorer coming back. We saw him kind of, hit his peak, hit his stride at the end of last season with 3 straight 20-point games in postseason play to end the year. And when we heard from him at Big Ten Media Day, Fred Hoiberg talked about trying to make him a more all-around player. We've seen glimpses of him defending point guards, playing point guard, initiating offense. I think we're still going to see instances of Bryce Williams bringing the ball up, initiating, maybe defending lead guards, and that's a side effect of the versatility that this roster has. What do you think, the key to, a successful season is for Bryce Williams individually? Obviously, it's a team game, but I think when you look at this roster from top to bottom, he's the guy who's built like an NBA player. He's got the intangibles to be an NBA player. What do you think a successful season looks like for Bryce Williams?
I think it's maybe a little bit of an increase in scoring. I think, he's the guy this year. He wasn't the leading scorer last year. That was Keisei Tominaga. But now, I think the way this team is structured, Nebraska's going to need him to score a couple more points a game than he did last year. I think and again, this is something he talked about at media days, becoming just a better all-around player, especially on the defensive end. He kind of has an interesting profile to me defensively because he's a very good on-ball defender. I think we saw that a lot last year, especially when he was guarding the one on defense. But he was one of those guys who could get a little lost in team defense. I can think of a lot of times where he'd get caught ball watching, and get beaten to the basket, things like that. So I think just becoming a little more consistent on the defensive end, because we know he has the length and the talent and the motor to do it. So I think just becoming a little more of an every possession presence defensively, doing a little bit more there, and just, kind of growing in every aspect, which maybe that's a little broad, but, continuing to be a facilitator like he was last season when they played him at the point guard. They won't have to play him at point as often this season, but just growing in his all-around game. I think he had a season where he was very good, but he also showed you where he could get better, where he still had to go from there. And I think just filling in some of those gaps for Bryce Williams.
Yeah, definitely. I would tend to agree with you. I think he's got a chance by the end of the year to maybe be an all league guy. And I think he'll be one of the leading scorers in the conference. And that is no slight to the rest of Nebraska's roster. I'm just really high on Bryce Williams, and I have been since he committed to Nebraska. Hearing about just how he carried himself from people who used to coach against him, had to scout for him. I was just like, they might have gotten a pretty good get here. And I know getting another year out of him and Juwan Gary is huge. It's huge for Fred Hoiberg and for this team. The other guy we got to talk to at Media Day, I just mentioned him, was Juwan Gary. He's the longest tenured Husker. He's been around the longest. I think his first season was the Sam Greasel season 2 seasons ago, or maybe
You're missing someone.
Oh, who am I forgetting?
Sam Hoiberg.
Oh, duh. Yeah. Sam Hoiberg. Whoops. But no, they're both.
He didn't play the year that 2021-22 season, but he redshirted. He was there.
There you go. Look at me forgetting. Look at Wilson go too. Look at that. Good shit. But there's a whole Juwan, he's had quite the journey, whether it be the injuries he's had, the highs we've seen. I mean, you and I have both talked about this. That Kansas State game last season where he finished with as many rebounds as he did, 11 of them offensively. I mean, that is etched in my brain. And there will just be random days where I'm just like, remember how Juwan Gary just bullied K-State for an entire game in their building? I think the biggest question with him remains the outside shooting, and that's kind of a common theme with this team as a whole. Spoiler alert for when we get to questions about the team ceiling. If Juwan, he's obviously going to be pretty front facing. He's a vocal leader. He's going to give us some great quotes in press conferences throughout the entire season. Similar question that I had with Bryce. What would be a successful season and for Juwan Gary to put a bow on his college career?
Yeah, I mean, just random thought. First of all, that Kansas State game, I think I've used this comparison before, but it looked like he could see like 2 seconds into the future. Like it looked like when the shot went up, he knew where it was going to come off the rim like half a second before anyone else did. It was incredible. But yeah, I think with him, it's just so much depends on if he can knock down shots, because he brings Juwan Gary brings a very high floor, because so much of what he does well just comes down to effort and hustle, and that's replicable. He can bring that every day, and he does. So no matter what, when he gets on the floor, he is gonna play hard on defense. He's gonna scrap for rebounds. He is going to, he's gonna be a dog, as he likes to say. So I think when you add that up, that's a solid player right there. And then so that's his floor. His ceiling will be how many 3-pointers he makes, how consistent he is shooting from outside. And we saw, we've certainly seen him improve over his 3 now seasons at Nebraska. And we saw times last year where he was really feeling it. He's kind of a streaky shooter last year. So there were days, I think about like the Minnesota game at PBA in like February, I think maybe even early March. That was one of his better games of the season all around, because he was doing all the kind of typical Juwan Gary stuff and knocking down shots. So I think that's his ceiling, is the version of himself that is doing the things we associate him with and also hitting 3-pointers. His floor is just that minus the 3-pointers, because we know what he can bring on a night in, night out basis.
Yeah, that Minnesota game you're referring to, he had 22 and 8 boards, but he made 4 threes that day. That's the Minnesota game you're thinking of from a season ago. And I agree with you. I think with on a team that has this size and this length 1 through 5, Juwan Gary, Fred Hoiberg has said as much. He plays above 6'6", that's for sure. But rebounding and that defensive edge is obviously going to be paramount for this team. And when you think defensive edge, looking at this roster, it kind of starts and maybe even ends. Not ends, but we will see. But when you think defensive edge on this team, you think Juwan Gary, and that K-State game is a perfect example. So obviously those two are the two main returners. The transfer portal class is a group of 6. Like I said, 5 of the 6 are power conference transfers. The group is Connor Esiason, transferred in from Wisconsin, Gavin Griffiths, who transferred in from Rutgers, Andrew Morgan, the first commit from back in the spring, who transferred in from North Dakota State, Braxton Mia, 7'1", transferred in from Washington. He began his career at Fresno State. And last but certainly not least, a true point guard, Riley Wooster, who has more than 100 career games played for Craig Smith between Utah State and Utah, who transferred in from Utah a season ago. That is the transfer portal. Oh, I forgot one again. I'm forgetting everybody. I forgot about Berke. How can I forget about Berke and his name that so many people are going to mispronounce throughout the year? He was the last addition to the portal class. He is every bit of 6'10", transferred in from UCLA, spent the summer playing with the Turkish national team. Look at me and my excellent prep, forgetting things twice. But Berke was the last addition. But yes, 5 of the 6 are coming from power conference schools. And then he doesn't count to this year's portal class, but he feels like a new addition, even though he ran the scout team a season ago. And that is Aaron Eulis, who sat out last season due to the results of the Iowa gambling investigation that turned out to not be much of an actual investigation at all. We're not here to talk legal. I don't speak legalese. I don't get happy reading lawsuits. But that kind of he feels like a transfer portal addition, even though he's been here for a year. When you look at this group as a whole, who's the transfer portal addition that you're the most intrigued by?
It's hard to narrow it down to one, but I'll go with Riley Wooster. Mm-hmm. And that me saying that is partially influenced by what we saw a couple days ago and just the impact of a steady veteran point guard on this team. I think it was the beginning of the second half in pretty much succession. He had a steal at one end, set up Bryce Williams for a 3 on the other. Next possession, drives to the basket, gets to the rim and lays it in. And a minute or two after that, he feeds, I think, Juwan Gary on a fast break for an easy layup, a 2-on-1 that with a veteran point guard, veteran ball handler, distributor, that's an easy layup for the other guy. So I think we saw just what he can bring to things. When I covered Indiana men's and women's basketball, the thing about Grace Berger, I would always think was she's the adult in the room. She was the stability. And I feel the same way about Riley Wooster. He's the adult in the room. He is not going to let anything get too out of hand. He is just a calming presence, stable with the ball in his hands. And it's the kind of guy Nebraska didn't really have last year. So he sticks out to me as intriguing.
Yeah, I think he would be my pick too. I kind of talked about him on my, exhibition game, reaction pod, but I don't think Nebraska's had as true of a true point guard as Riley Wooster in quite some time. And I think he's got a very good chance to be a big time impact player on both ends of the court. I mean, he's built like a linebacker and he's going to be playing point guard. He's got a ton of experience, playing in the Pac-12 for Craig Smith, even then back to Utah State as well. And I think that's a great comparison. I mean, I think he's the adult in the room. He's battle tested. He's dealt with all sorts of adversity, whether it be wins, losses, or injury. I mean, he's done it all in his college career, and I think he would be my choice as well. And Nebraska didn't have a true point guard a season ago. They now have 2. I like what I like what we've seen from Aaron Eulis, and that's the thing. Like Raleigh has looked really impressive, but I think Aaron Eulis is definitely going to have a role. I mean, he's going to play. I mean, that's for sure. And I think he can be a change of pace. He could maybe even be like a defensive stopper. Like there's a guy, go guard him. And I think that's a stark contrast from what we saw, at the one a season ago.
Yeah, it kind of feels, doesn't it feel like they're going to, at the end of the season, we're going to look at games and say, like, that was an Aaron Eulis game.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like he's a guy who, and Sam Hoiberg was this guy last year, and he can certainly still be this guy, but one of the guys who comes off the bench and kind of puts a charge into things when everyone else is flat. That's Eulis. I think he's going to be the guy who tries to push the pace. If we're comparing the 2 point guards, I think Eulis is the guy who tries to play in space a little bit more, push things a little bit more. And we saw last year at times how that can kind of jumpstart a team.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think like those Sam Hoiberg moments last year. He comes in, gets a big steal, gets a big defensive stop. Or, I mean, we saw. I mean, it was against the Division II team on Sunday, but Aaron Eulis actually was willing to put his head down and go to the basket. Those are where all his makes came from, playing downhill and going to the rim, and that can sometimes be forgotten on a team that will play mostly 4 out, sometimes 5, and be looking to pull up from the perimeter. Just go put your shoulder into someone and try to take it to the basket. I think Aaron Eulis will not be afraid to do that at whatsoever. Do you think there's a member of the transfer portal class who has kind of flown under the radar and isn't being talked about enough?
Is Gavin Griffiths is he eligible for this category after Sunday?
I think so. I think he is. I think he's kind of. I mean, he is him and Berke are the two young guys in the group. They're both going to be true sophomores. But I think Gavin is kind of. I mean, a lot's been made of all these portal guys, but I think in the grand scheme, I think he would definitely qualify. And there, he didn't. All we've got to look at is an inter-squad scrimmage in a volleyball arena and an exhibition game against a Division II team. But I think that that Sunday was a perfect example of how he's going to see the floor. I think. I mean, I don't think he's going to have to shoot 4 or 5 every game, but if he's hitting shots from the outside, he was able to go in and grab a few rebounds. I mean, that's the ticket for him to rise above, in the rotation when it comes time to, cut it down when we get closer to conference play.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic with him and Connor Essegian, because we've seen this team has played in public in front of fans twice, and one guy has had the hot hand in each game, and it kind of feels like that's the formula, right? If you're Fred Hoiberg, you got 2 pure shooters who can heat up at any time. You just, on a given night, you ride the one that is hitting shots, and it feels like that there are worse formulas, there are worse ways to go about things than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, and you and I, we talked a little bit in the spring and in the summer, and I'm asking if this is still, we'll ask a couple more big picture, big season questions. Do you think that the shot making from Essegian and Griffiths is still kind of what may determine like the ceiling for this team?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, if those guys come out and they both shoot 38% from 3, I think this is going to be a really good team. That's replacing Casey and replacing CJ Wilcher just from a pure shooting perspective. That'll be what kind of buoys a team through kind of a rough day. Good shooting can make up for a lot of things on the offensive end, maybe when things aren't going all that well. And yeah, I think if they come out and they're both knocking down shots and they do that consistently for an entire season, this is going to be a really, really tough team to guard.
Yeah, and that's still kind of my thought too. I mean, I think we know what we're gonna get from Bryce Williams, and then the question is, who's next? Like, who's next? Like, if Bryce Williams is gonna go out, get you 18, 18, 17 a game, like, who's gonna be the guy with 12? Who's gonna be the guy with 14? Who's able to not pick up the slack, but just be the second option? Like, I think that's kind of one of my big picture questions, for the season is like who's your second leading scorer? I think we know who the leading scorer is going to be. It would be a pretty big upset if it was anyone not named Bryce Williams. But that'll be when we get to big picture, season long questions. So how about the interior? We've seen the importance of the playmaking big man. Apt for a podcast with this name, right? But we've seen the importance of it. I've half jokingly, half seriously referred to it as Fred Hoiberg chasing the ghost of George Niang for 3 years. I think we saw the closest to that last season with Rink Mast and the importance of him as a pressure release. Back-to-back seasons, Nebraska's leading assist man is their starting center. I don't think that's going to be the case this season.
No.
It looks a little different. Obviously, with Braxton Mia, the first true 7-footer to step foot in Lincoln in quite some time. And then Andrew Morgan, who, when he committed in the spring, people looked at his body type and looked at some tape and said, is his role the Rink Mast role? That was even before Rink's injury was really public, and like the extent of it was public. People were like, "Are these guys on the court at the same time? What is the role for him?" Obviously, we didn't get to see Andrew Morgan on Sunday because was in the concussion protocol. If you want to know how, you can go look at Connor Season's Instagram. But
A butt cushion, as Connor called
a
it on
butt
Instagram.
cushion, as Connor Season referred to it. I would recommend you go look at that and the comment section if you want a good chuckle. But when you look at the interior, and then you could even throw Berke into this conversation, I guess, as well, because we've heard Fred talk about lineups with him as a small ball 5. We've seen it a little bit, but not too much. How much do you think that the legitimate post depth that this team has, how is that going to impact, the offense in comparison to what, we feel is the ideal, Fred Hoiberg role? Because I don't think Braxton Mia is going to be like going to the elbow to initiate DHOs like Rink Mast and Derek Walker were. I don't think that's going to be where we see him.
No, but I think that is where we're going to see Andrew Morgan. I remember talking to Morgan on the phone after he committed, and he said on his visit, like that was the film they watched, was of Rink and him initiating from the elbow and the top of the key, hitting cutters, going to the basket. Like Rink, Morgan is a solid, not great, but enough of a 3-point shooter that guys can't sag off of him. So I think that's kind of his archetype. I think Rink Mast is like an example of what Nebraska will expect Andrew Morgan to do, how he can contribute. But yeah, that is not at all Braxton Mia's skill set. I think Mia is going to score on lobs and dunks and putbacks and layups because that's what he does. He is a blunt force player. He is 7'1". And he brings, similar to Raleigh, a skill set Nebraska didn't have last year. Off the top of my head, I can think of 5 games where Nebraska could have used a Braxton Mia type last year. Probably most notably the Big Ten tournament against Illinois and the NCAA tournament against Texas A&M. They got pushed around under the basket in those games, and that is where a Braxton Mia type comes in. I was intrigued by him, seeing him play in the intra-squad scrimmage just for the way he played defense. I mean, he kind of swallowed up more. There were times Morgan tried to take him off the dribble or tried to post him up, and Andrew Morgan's a pretty skilled big man, and Mia just kind of swallowed him up when he when he went after him. So I think just his rim protection and physicality and rebounding will kind of give Nebraska an element and more versatility than they had last year. They'll have someone to go to when they're getting kind of beaten up under the basket.
Yeah, I think like versatility is kind of the word of the day with this team, and we heard as much from Fred in Chicago. We've heard it, over the off season. Like, man, that's kind of what I'm going to be looking at the most, like the early season. I mean, obviously, they have this light non-con again that people weren't too fond of when it got announced. But I think that's purposeful because I mean they want to play with lineups, they want to play with rotations. They want to see what works. Obviously, they only have the three, quote unquote, bye games to start before you're at the Pentagon to play St. Mary's, who's going to be tough. They're going to be hard nosed. They're going to run good offense. And then 5 days later, you go up the road to play a top 15 team in their barn after they embarrassed you in yours a season ago. And that's going to be, two pretty big tests in November. We're gonna look at the season as a whole in a bit, but I mean versatility is definitely the word of the day, and I think Fred Hoiberg means it when he says that they're still playing with stuff on purpose and they're trying to figure stuff out because there's a lot of options, there's a lot of viable guys from top to bottom. Let's see, and then to wrap up the roster. We can talk about the true freshmen and the walk-ons. We don't know how much we'll see of any of these guys. We saw Cale Jacobson early in the first half, and it's been a good summer of Cale Jacobson talk from Fred, talking about how he is he was one guy away from being a rotation guy last year, and then Fred said as much on Sunday afternoon. We wanted to get Cale in there because there will be games where he plays because he's a smart, savvy guy who's going to make the right play. He's going to play the right way. He's going to play smart. So I think Sam Hoiberg, who I forgot earlier. Sorry, Sam. No chance you're listening to this, but I'll remember. But he technically counts as a walk-on as well. And I think Nebraska in Sam, Cale, and then Justin Bolus, new addition from the junior college ranks. I don't know how much we'll see from him this season, but he's definitely not your typical walk-on either. So I think Nebraska's got a good group, and that's no slight to you, Henry Burt. You're a part of this group too. You're a part of the walk-ons. But I think that, if called upon, I think Sam Hoiberg, Cale Jacobson, and even Justin Bolus could be serviceable if they were all, called upon for action this season. I mean, obviously we haven't seen Sam yet. He's battling an injury, but I think you're with me on it's been a good summer of Cale talk from Fred.
Yeah. I mean, one thing on Sam, I referenced this earlier, but there are games that Nebraska won last year that I don't know that they win without Sam Hoiberg. The Ohio State game sticks out to me. I remember that was one they were just kind of flat in the first, 6 or 7 minutes, and he came off the bench, and he's a guy who plays with his hair on fire, and he was kind of a spark. He got things going. And the other one that sticks out in my mind is the Purdue game, because they won that game by what, like 20, right? Something like that.
Something ridiculous.
But like the mark. But like the thing is, one play can really, like one sequence can go a long ways. And I think Nebraska led by 12 at 10 or 12 going into halftime, and that came from a Sam Hoiberg steal pick six layup.
Mm-hmm.
And he got to the rim again and finished and knocked down a 3-pointer. Like, he was single-handedly responsible for like a 5-point swing at the end of that half. And without that, they go into they go into halftime up 5. That's a completely different complexion of a game. And who knows what happens in the second 20 minutes without that. So I think I say that that's a very long-winded way to say, I think regardless of, who else is around, like Sam Hoiberg has a skill set, and that is a useful skill set, regardless of anything else. But yeah, in terms of the other walk-ons, Fred has said, man, he says it at just about every availability that Cale Jacobson was one was one injury away from playing last year. We've heard that quite a bit. And by all accounts, even from non-Fred people, he is an above average walk-on. He is better than your average walk-on, and I think that also applies to Justin Bolus. I don't know how many guys are coming out of Southeast Community College who are 6'9" and athletic and can shoot threes, but that's Justin Bolus. He's skilled, he's talented, and that's another guy who I think it was at media days, Fred said at some point he will play. At some point in his Nebraska career, he has 3 to 4 years, depending on if he takes a red shirt at some point or whatever. But at some point in his career, Justin Bolus will get minutes, and I completely believe it because he has the frame and the skill set, and maybe not the refinement, but that comes. He has the tools of a guy who can contribute in the 10.
Absolutely. And I just realized I forgot a guy in a group for the third time today. Jeff Grace. No Jeff Grace erasure from me. We're here to acknowledge you, Jeff Grace.
Jeff Grace, team chemistry guy, glue guy.
I think Fred called him a rock star on Sunday. I think he said Jeff Grace has been a rock star. And he's another longer tenured guy too.
Yeah.
Him and Sam played AAU ball together when Fred was the coach of the Bulls, and that's the connection with Jeff Grace. So no Jeff Grace erasure, but yes.
And I was not being facetious when I said chemistry guy, glue guy.
Absolutely.
You are not going to meet many people who don't like Jeff Grace. That's the reality.
Yep, and he's always smiling. He's always smiling. He's always in a good mood, and they've definitely they people love Jeff. It kind of goes without saying. People love Jeff. He's always in a good mood. He's definitely a great locker room guy. He was the team's representative on a life skills trip to Ecuador over the summer too. And he's just because these guys don't get minutes doesn't mean they don't play a big part in the team and the chemistry in the locker room and all that.
He wasn't a walk-on, but Boogie Coleman last year, by all accounts, was one of their major leaders. A guy who could have easily, pouted and mentally checked out in his last year when he fell out of the rotation. By all accounts, didn't do that.
Yeah, definitely. And last but certainly not least with the roster is the two true freshmen, Nick Janowski, 6'4" guard from Pewaukee, Wisconsin, and Braden Frager, who reclassified. He was originally committed to the class of 2025 out of Lincoln Southwest, the first scholarship player to sign out of high school who is from Lincoln since the current color analyst on the radio, Jake Muehlheisen, in 2000. And that was Braden Frager. That was the what went along with him when he decided to reclass and join the class of 2024. 6'7". I've said Frager is almost you hear people get called late bloomers. He's almost an early bloomer. He's 17 years old. He should be in his senior year of high school. And when he was on the court in the inter squad, he looked the part, with a bunch of experienced Big Ten guys. Like I said, with the walk-ons, who knows what we'll see from either of these guys? But then again, nobody really redshirts anymore. It's weird for true freshmen in college basketball because no one really redshirts anymore. It's definitely it's more rare. It's rare nowadays. But I think by all accounts, these guys have had a good summer since they got to campus. They've shown flashes. They're still true freshmen. And I think it's definitely worth, putting a little stock into these guys, down the line, right? They definitely, we know what their roles could be down the line. They're just the young guys on a really old and experienced team.
Yeah, I think a couple thoughts on each of them. Janowski, I think a lot of what I said about Juwan Gary at the beginning here applies to Janowski in just regardless of anything else, that's a guy who's going to come out and he's going to play hard and he's going to play defense and he's going to bring energy. That's a skill set. That's a skill, being able to do that. And he's going to do that, regardless of how much playing time he gets. He certainly doesn't lack for confidence. He's not going to be intimidated going in. Playing Big Ten basketball, whatever his role is, if he, who knows? But he's a guy. If nothing else, he's going to play hard, and that matters, especially in a conference like the Big Ten. Frager, I don't think I'm alone in that. I wasn't really sure what to expect from him, or at least what to expect, like when that came out that he was reclassifying. Because he dealt with some injuries his senior year at Southwest. He didn't have like the greatest, he didn't set the world on fire. I guess it would have been his junior year for a guy committed to a Big Ten program. But again, I think, he dealt with like some ankle issues. I think that had more to do with it than anything else. And of course you're going to wonder, he comes in, he's 17 years old. How is he going to fit in? And we still don't know. The season hasn't started, but we do know he's not, physically he's there. Like he's not going to get pushed around. He's a sturdy 6'7". Like he fits. He's a shooter. We know that. So I don't know that this is the Braden Frager year, but I think one of these years will be. I think there's a lot to like about how he plays and just his build and his tools and just what he'll be able to do when he puts it all together and has some experience.
Yeah, I haven't lived in Lincoln in a couple years, but when I did, I was spending a lot of time on Zillow and Redfin looking at places to live. And if you're, into property investing in the Lincoln area, I don't think there are any islands out there, but so if you're looking to invest in Braden Frager, support local real estate. That may be, a flyer to take. Down the line, because I think he is all in on Nebraska. He's a Lincoln kid through and through. We've had a run of those recently, which with between Frager, Josiah, Sam Griesel, there's been a whole run of. Sam Hoiberg counts too. He graduated from a Lincoln high school. No Sam Hoiberg erasure ever on this podcast, but there's been a run of Lincoln kids recently, which has been been pretty cool as to see in the program. But I think if you're looking to, if you're looking at rental properties, and you see, Frager rental properties, and you want to invest, for future endeavors, maybe something worth taking a
Buying
flyer on.
property on Braden Frager Island.
Buying property on Braden Frager Island.
Is there is it like a little inlet like on Holmes Lake?
Yeah, I don't
Braden
know what.
Frager Bay.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything out in the middle of Capitol Beach, out on Capitol Lake, but yeah, Braden Frager Bay, I like that. Maybe on on Holmes or somewhere in and around Lincoln, there maybe something to buy property on. So that kind of is the rundown of the roster. These dudes are big. These dudes have played a lot of basketball, but the kind of the overarching questions that I have, and you can share yours as well, are my questions are outside shooting, which we've talked about with Griffiths and Essesian, and the importance that those guys will play. Who else could be a threat from the outside? But outside shooting in general is kind of the question for me, because we saw how critical of a role it was, for last year's team. And when you think Fred Hoiberg basketball, you think pace, space, you think making threes. So that's gonna be, a necessity for any Fred Hoiberg basketball team. My other biggest question, we got a partial answer to it against the Division II team on Sunday, but it's defensive schemes. I think we've talked, you and I off pod and people in general have talked about like lineup versatility. I'm interested in the defensive schemes that could maybe get thrown out with this team. You have a guy like Mia who you can park and drop coverage and just, have things get funneled into him. If you feel like you could have, he's going to be a rim protector one way or another. It's just what you want to do with him. And then you've got like the versatile lineups where you could try to stick with the no middle defense that we've seen these last 2 years that can look like a scramble drill at times, but when it looks good, it's really effective. See the Purdue game a season ago. I think there's plenty of options on the defensive end, and I'm intrigued by could they throw in some new defensive looks that we haven't seen with this team with the Fred Hoiberg Nebraska teams in years past. And then last but certainly not least is the post. I've been kind of skeptical on the Braxton Mia fit. We'll see. I've just that whole group, like put them off to the side. I think I've got a good feel for the guards and wings, but the actual between the number of actual bodies in the room and then just fit, like the posts, like those are my three big questions. What do you think are your like overarching questions, for this group this season?
I'm with you on the shooting, just for all your reasons. Yeah, and we've seen like this is a team that needs to make 3-pointers to be successful. This is an NBA style offense. And that means taking a lot of threes, like you said, space and pace. And the past couple of years they've had the personnel to do that, and they need to keep doing it. And that, I guess, goes back to my point of Connor Essegian and Gavin Griffiths will go a long way in determining the ceiling of this team. Similar to your point on the big men, I'm going to get even more specific and say one of my big questions is Berke Buchtengel, just because he is an international man of mystery. I think that's an Austin Powers movie.
It is. That is an Austin Powers movie title, but it is a very apt description.
Yes, Berke Buchtengel, international man of mystery.
I can see the Rothstein tweet now, but carry on.
Because this is a guy who the best basketball he's played in his career has been on the international stage. He played at UCLA last year, and he had his moments. He didn't light the world on fire, but the times that he has shown like what has this coaching staff so excited, I think have been more on the international stage. There have been tournaments where he shot 40% from three. I think he was 28% last year at UCLA, and where it kind of all comes together of like, this guy can do everything. I think we've seen a little bit of the rebounding and the ball handling. We saw some point Berke on Sunday where he got the rebound, and as Fred said would be the case, he got the board and took it himself up the floor. But I think there's so many, I've used this word a lot in the past 45 minutes, but just tools. He can shoot, he can pass, he can handle the ball. He hasn't really put all of those together at this point in his career. He hasn't formed into the basketball Voltron that he seems to have the potential to be. So I just think now there's a guy who, if he becomes that guy, if he puts it all together, the ceiling raises another story or two, on this Nebraska team. So he's one I am probably most intrigued about and have the least feel for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Because we've seen, he had 13 and 13 in the inter squad, and then he had 12 rebounds in the exhibition against Grand Valley State. But there were moments where we saw point Berke, and there are moments where we saw him make lazy passes and look a step slow. We've seen a little bit of everything with him, just in the small sample size that we've seen so far. But I'm with you on that for sure. Did you have a third big question? Or
I gotta come up with a third.
I had three, so that's.
Okay,
you don't have to. No pressure. No pressure? No pressure.
Yeah, I would say my third is just how the rotation turns out. Just because Nebraska played an 8-man rotation last year, and I'd say there are 10 viable guys right now, and that's not even including the freshman or the walk-on. So and those first few games, that first month of the season will be very telling and probably go a long way to determine in what things look like when they solidify and who, if anyone, gets left behind, because I doubt they're going to play 10 all season. And, maybe someone gets injured and that kind of, Nebraska doesn't have a choice, but, at some point,
the deck. Could reshuffle the deck. One injury could just completely flip it.
Yeah. So I think that's what I'm looking for, is who kind of wins the competition for those rotation spots, assuming they, if they play 8 or 9 again this season.
Yeah, no, those are three great ones as well. So, Yeah, we'll get toward wrapping up. We'll get toward wrapping up here, but when you look at this, we'll go even bigger picture. We went pretty big picture with the roster. Now we're going to go even bigger picture. You had a vote in the unofficial preseason media poll, and Nebraska had a very wide range in that poll across the conference media. Picked as high as I believe seventh by someone, and as low as 17th by someone. If you had to put like an exact, ceiling floor in the conference for this team this year, and this can obviously, it can be a range. I'm not going to make you be oddly specific. What do you think the floor and ceiling, like in an 18-team Big Ten, is for this Nebraska team?
I think it's really easy to forget that they finished third last year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like if you surveyed 100 random people, where did Nebraska finish last year? Most of them would not realize they were third in the conference. They were behind Purdue and Illinois. They
Mm-hmm.
finished ahead of Wisconsin, Northwestern, Michigan State, and it felt weirdly under the radar the entire time.
Yep.
So with that in mind, you got to figure if they can replicate last year, right? And I'm not saying they will, but in theory, if they could be a top 5 Big Ten team. I think that's the best case scenario, right? But
yeah,
if you just base what they did last year and who they have coming in, and the fact that the Big Ten seems more wide open this season than it did a year ago. No more Zach Edey. There's no, like last year, Purdue was just the consensus best team and no one really challenged them. I don't think there is a team like that this season.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, I think like 9th or 10th. Is that fair?
Yeah.
I think like last year, it's going to be a very crowded middle of the pack in the Big Ten, and I think Nebraska is among those teams. And the chips will fall as they do, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of difference in that. A lot of variation in that kind of middle ground in the Big Ten. I think Nebraska will be part of it.
Yeah, this may be like just my proximity to the program, like where I look at, like, I don't really see, unless there's injuries, and I'm going to knock on my desk because someone's going to call me out for saying what I'm about to say. I don't really see a scenario where the bottom falls out on this team.
Yeah.
Like, I really don't. Like, I think they're gonna be okay. Like, there could be like a couple like losses in a row, but I don't think they're gonna be like in the cellar. Like, I don't really see that being an option for this group. Like, and that may just be the trust that I have in Fred Hoiberg as a basketball observer. Like, when I look at this roster on paper and compare it to the rest of the league, like, I don't really see a scenario, unless they're just riddled with injuries, where the bottom falls out. And you can agree with me or not. I don't know if you'd agree, but
yeah, I think that points to the experience and the veterans they brought in. I think Fred Hoiberg over the past few years has assembled these kind of high floor teams. They're teams that, Nebraska is never going to be a program that lands, these blue chip high school recruits. At least hasn't often been throughout its throughout history, but through the portal, there's a lot of kind of low risk guys who have come in. Rink Mass, Josiah Alec this season. I think that's like Raleigh Wooster. Andrew Morgan, like just kind of guys who
high floor guys.
What?
They're high floor guys.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
they're kind of like
Yeah.
you said. I forget who you brought up high floor with, but I think they're all high floor guys. Like, I don't like they know what they want to do. They've been around the block once or twice. Like, they're gonna, like, your floor is high. It's just the question of how much can they raise your ceiling. Like, it's just, I think there's a baseline with a veteran group, and I think Nebraska has a solid foundation, a solid baseline with the group they've got.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So looking at, and we can wrap up here. I promise you have given me enough of your time, and I appreciate you. But we can wrap up with some general Big Ten stuff. Looking at the league as a whole, obviously, people will gladly tell you that there's 18 teams in the league now, that there are teams out on the West Coast, and tell you. I mean, I wonder if Oregon's still going to, try to bring the big inflatable duck around for basketball season. But those were the words of the day in Chicago when we were at Big Ten Media Day. And I'll ask you some actual questions. I won't make any just general declarative statements. One team in this league that you think is getting too much hype, and one team in this league that you think is a sleeper team.
It's tough. As far as getting too much hype, Indiana.
Ooh,
I don't
okay.
know, but so I covered Indiana for a year, and somehow they're gonna randomly be listening to this Nebraska basketball podcast and like clip that because that's how that fan base operates. But
Yeah, can't wait to see you get clipped on Pigs. I can't wait. It's gonna be great.
but no, I mean, they have the personnel to be good, but are they going to use it? I mean, this is Mike Woodson has said, he likes, inside out basketball. And, so they have Miles Rice, they have Luke Goody, but how modern is that offense really going to be? And, we saw how they could succeed 2 years ago behind, one dominant big and enough shooting. But that dominant big was Trace Jackson Davis. And like, as good as Umar Ballo is, Trace Jackson Davis was like a top 2 player in the country that year. Like, I think you can make a case that season the 2 best players in the country both played in the state of Indiana, and Zach Edey and Trace Jackson Davis. Like, it works with him. Will it work with anyone below that just like, pantheon echelon of big men? And will they run a system that utilizes the shooters they have enough to be a little more modern than a season ago?
Yeah, I've kind of made my thoughts on Indiana pretty well known. Like, they want to think they have shooters, but do they? Like, they like is like Trey Galloway. We know what Trey Galloway is. He's not a shooter. You bring in Goody, and obviously he's shown that he can do it, in the Big Ten. But I mean, those guards they brought in are not shooters. Like Miles Rice and Cannon Carlisle are not shooters, and there are going to be some instances where like the spacing with some of these groupings for Indiana, like Malik Reneau and Umar Ballo on the court at the same time, when Malik Reneau is like probably your best, like your most proven player, like he's gonna like those two on the court at the same time, like that just does not. I mean, it just. I think that whole situation in what might be the biggest make or break season for a head coach that I can remember for Mike Woodson, I kind of think it's got more like blow up in your face potential than like set the world on fire and make the second weekend in the NCAA tournament potential. Just looking at it from top to bottom, and if the one person in Bloomington that I'd worry about hearing that just heard that, I'm sorry, but that you know who you are. But those are my true thoughts on that team. Do you have a sleeper pick? Because I've got one.
Okay, let me hear yours first so I can have a little bit of time to think.
I don't think USC is going to be like really good, but I think they're going to be better than people think. And I know that they're the I mean, it's Eric Musselman. He loves turning teams over. It's a whole brand new team, year one under a new coach. And I'm not saying they're going to go out and win the Big Ten. And no, I'm not just box score watching from their charity exhibition game win against a top 10 team. But Muss basically played how many 6'6" guys can I put on a roster? And he definitely hit the over. And I think I like I like him as a coach. I like some of their pieces. I think they're going to be really athletic. I think they're going to score, and I think they're going to. I think they're going to be. I think they're a sleeper because they were picked they were picked toward the bottom four in the media poll. They're not. People aren't really thinking about them. There's a lot of love for the other team in Los Angeles, but I think USC would be my Big Ten sleeper.
All right, I'll go with Illinois for mine.
Ooh, okay.
I mean, did they lose a lot? Yes, but I think Brad Underwood knows what he's doing. I think Ben Hugh. I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation. The dude from Evansville. I think
from Evansville.
Is one of the more underrated transfer pickups. I don't think Illinois is going to be as good as they were last year. They just lost too much. But I think they can be a solid team. I think they've modernized a bit over the past couple of years, and I think they can be solid.
Yeah, and I am very intrigued by I'm not going to butcher a pronunciation either, but the Lithuanian kid